Hello everybody and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback and on today's episode I'm going to show you my very first Grimdawn character ever. This build is a level 100 warder. In Ultimate, a warder is a shaman and a soldier, two of my favorite classes in the entire game. So I'll give you the lowdown on how this build has developed and show you what got me here. But all that being said, sit back, relax, and enjoy a healthy dose of ear contact. Now, in order to start off this build video, we're going to focus on the classes, and I'm going to do my best to wrap them up quickly so we can get everything into one video, because it's Ultimate, it's at the end game, really doesn't have much of a leveling guide as is right now, because I got this character to level 100 over 2 years ago. So yeah. Anyway, if you need that kind of thing, let me know in the comments below. Maybe I can put together a different video for leveling this. But as it is right now, your soldier is actually going to be your main tree for the warder class. This is a two-handed warder class, so no shields involved, and all of the defensive options that we have are going to fill in the gap that would normally be us using a one-handed weapon with a shield. We should be dealing lots of damage though to mitigate that, as you can probably tell. But anyway, your main damage dealing tool with this build is going to be Blade Arc. Blade Arc is it's a soldier skill with a big cleaving AoE out in front, and it is going to be dealing almost double, actually triple, your weapon damage, along with bleeding damage, and we are going to take the modifier Clean Sweep for this as well, along with Laceration. We're going to put as much damage into Blade Arc as humanly possible. So, all that being said, Blade Arc has a chance to knock down the targets for about 1.5 seconds. That's a good stun on a 61% chance at level 22. The crit damage is going to get buffed pretty decently with Clean Sweep, and Laceration is going to give it even more crit damage, buffing the bleeding damage, and tack on some physical internal trauma damage as well. So all of these things considered, Blade Arc is spammable as far as this build goes, and it is going to be incredibly effective with the other gear that we're using. So it's all late game gear. There are other modifiers to Blade Arc which make it incredibly impactful. You do want to land a couple of hits on your targets beforehand, but Blade Arc does do a very good job at blowing them up from about 75% or 60% of their health bar to nothing. After that, our next big offensive skill is actually going to be over on the shaman tree, and that is Savagery. Savagery also shares the spotlight with Primal Strike. Both of these are going to be fairly decent in dealing damage so that Blade Arc can clean stuff up. But Savagery is going to replace your normal auto attack. You're just going to swing this with your left quick, get those charges up, deal your bleeding damage, which is the big damage focus of this build, along with some lightning damage. We have the modifier that is going to increase the damage that Savagery does as well, because we're using a two-handed melee weapon, as it's also going to give us some physical resistance at that 8% with 3 points in there, which is pretty nutty considering that physical resistance is very hard to come by when you're in Ultimate. Tenacity of the Boar is also a good pickup because it's giving you offensive ability, which you desperately need, and your health regen is going to go up as well. Slow resistance is fine, but ultimately we're not as worried about being slowed down. Primal Strike is the other part of this equation, because it is also dealing lightning and bleeding damage with the ability to stun targets for about 2 to 3 seconds. No modifiers on this ability. We could ultimately take up the the Storm Surge, which is the final modifier in the tree, but as it is right now, it's not entirely necessary. Ultimately, what that would do is just buff the bleeding damage, and the physical damage while adding in some more lightning and electrocute. Being that lightning and electrocute are not the big damage sources in this build, it's not super necessary. So more so than that, your shaman side of things, you'll want points into brute force, feral hunger, and upheaval. As far as the number of points, you only have to have 1 or 2 into both brute force and upheaval, but the main chunk of those points is going to go into feral hunger. So as far as brute force goes, it's a two-handed weapon bonus, and what it's going to do is passively add in some lightning damage as well as health to your character. So you just get flat health along with some buffs to physical and internal trauma damage, but the health and the lightning damage are decent. More importantly though, they unlock feral hunger, which is the second modifier in this tree. You got a 26% chance to use it, which is still pretty good because we're attacking fairly fast. It goes off in a 180-degree arc in front of your character, hitting 5 targets, and it is going to convert 33% of the damage that it does into health. Does 204 bleeding damage over 2 seconds at level 10, but all that considered, this passive specifically is incredibly good at healing our character because it's a big AoE and it is doing some pretty big damage. If it hits multiple people, occasionally this will give me about 25% of my health bar back in an instant. So upheaval is just the cherry on top. You can take a couple points into that for the increased damage on brute force as it stands, but feral hunger is the most important part of brute force, so that's really all you got to worry about. After this, you're going to need to max out all of your points in the shaman's defensive side of things, which is Mogdrogen's Pact. Now, all that being said, we'll talk about the soldier defensive tree after this one because there's a lot more to it. But just remember, all the points that you can into Mogdrogen's is going to give you health regen, physical damage. Heart of the Wild, which is the first modifier, gives you a % health increase. That's 27% at level 11, while reducing bleeding and poison damage. And then Oak Skin is going to give you Pierce and Aether resistance along with a whole bunch of flat armor. Basically, the entire Mogdrogen's Pact tree is incredibly powerful for staying alive, and I would 100% recommend it get maxed out as best you possibly can do it. Now, moving back over to the soldier tree, your first defensive passive is going to be Menhir's Will. This is going to activate when you drop below a certain health percentage, and you have to have either a shield or a two-handed melee weapon, which we do, obviously. This one is hyper maxed out as well. We're going to get 66% of our health back, along with 300-ish health regen per second. And that activates once we drop below 33% health. So this is basically a cheat death when we get really low, and it is a gigantic amount of our health bar back. This comes in big time handy when you're playing or when you're fighting against big bosses, stuff that can easily kill you with a stray hit that you cannot kill first. All things considered, if you get surrounded pretty often, since you probably won't be using as much mobility, that's untrue. You've got a pretty big mobility ability with the metal in this build. But anyway, the case is, when you're in ultimate, you're still going to take a lot of damage really fast. You need to have something to catch you if you misjudge the enemies around you and get pretty close to death. This one is a passive, perfect panic button for anybody to understand that they are about to die and run away. After that, though, there is military conditioning. This is just a flat soldier passive that will give you 19% to your physique and then 24% to your health at level 12. Very good stats for someone who wants to stand still and live while still fighting the good fight. After that, we've got a couple points into Decorated Soldier, mainly for the elemental resistance. So I've only got 3 in it right now, but that gives me 10% elemental resistance, which is a good chunk. After that, the Scars of Battle, again, not too many. We've only got 5 points in it, but this is giving me 20% bleeding resistance, 20% reduced stun duration, 20% reduced freeze duration, and increasing our armor absorption by 18%. Pretty wicked sick stuff for the passive soldier side of things. The toggleable passives, we've got Field Command. These, again, only a couple points, but they're still very good for what they're doing. Base Field Commands give you offensive and defensive ability with an increase in armor, but after that, we're getting attack and casting speed with Squad Tactics. Your next passive on the soldier tree is going to be your Fighting Spirit, and this activates anytime that you take damage. It's got a 42% chance of activating a 8-second duration and a 12-second recharge, but when it does tick on, your offensive ability is going to skyrocket, making it much easier to crit enemies and deal more damage. Obviously, dealing crits is pretty important because there are a couple of devotions in this build that require that, but we'll talk about that more in a second. The last passive on the soldier tree to talk about is Oleron's Rage. Oleron's Rage is an exclusive skill, so if you are thinking about taking Primal Bond for the Shaman instead, you've got to pass up this. It's going to give you internal trauma damage, buffing physical pierce internal trauma damage as well, but the most important part about Oleron's Rage is the offensive ability increase at 16%. Once again, damage important, but crit damage specifically for this build and its devotions is super important too. Your movement speed increase at 13% is pretty wicked sick, I'm not gonna lie, but ultimately not the big reason that we're going to be picking Oleron's Rage. Now, let's pull those devotions up so you can hear all about why we need that offensive ability. Our our outer devotions, our outer ring devotions, there are only, actually, I don't know if Rawan Scepter counts. I don't think it does. I think it's like one ring off of outer tier, even though it's placed kind of weird. But I guess you could consider Mogdrogen the Wolf and Oleron our two big boys at the end of all things. The reason that we've got Mogdrogen the Wolf is not the bonuses to all pets, as I'm sure you can tell. This is not a pet build, but the health bonuses, the offensive bonuses it applies, the buffs to bleeding damage that you'll get from it, as well as the vampiric damage that you'll get from it, and the resistances. The wolf gives you elemental resistance, bleeding resistance, and vitality resistance, all in pretty big numbers. It's 15 for elemental, 15 for bleeding, and 20 for vitality, while also giving you a +3 to the maximum bleeding resistance in your kit, which is pretty gross considering that those are all very good resistances to have. Elemental in and of itself is always worth it, I think. The activatable, though, for Mogdrogen the Wolf is Howl of Mogdrogen with a 20% chance on attack, and we've bound it to Blade Arc. It's got a 15-second cooldown, but it's got a 10-second duration once it goes off, letting you deal bleeding damage, as well as reducing the target's defensive ability for 3 seconds, and buffing your attack and casting speed ridiculously by 18 and 15% respectively. It's pretty gross once this stuff starts working, because you can obviously continue to use Savagery in the middle of this with your upheaval and feral hunger going off. So you're getting the stacking. Sorry, you're getting the vampiric attack from feral hunger, along with 10% more from the wolf, along with increased attack speed and opportunity to use it with increased damage because Howl is going off. You'll be using Blade Arc on cooldown anyway, and if you don't opt to take Clean Sweep, you can just hold down Blade Arc as a spam button. I mean, it'll basically replace an auto attack but you'll still want to vary it up between Savagery and Blade Arc. I use the cooldown on Blade Arc as a means to force myself to switch between. So the other one, Oleron's Rage, is all about, again, similar statistics. You're going to get flat health. You're getting physical resistance, bleeding resistance, armor, offensive ability, a whole bunch of really good stats for this class. And then we're going to blind the passive ability from the devotion to our Savagery. This is a 100% chance on crits. It's called Blind Fury, and it gives the character the ability to deal damage in a 6-meter area, 75% of your weapon damage, but it's going to be big physical, internal trauma, bleeding damage, and slow enemy attacks for 5 seconds. It's only got a 1 second recharge as well, so basically if you get a chain of crits that are, you know, like 3 or 4, you can get 2 to 3 instances of Blind Fury off, doing some big work for your kit. Those are the big passives as far as you know, damage dealing abilities in the devotions, but you'll also want to pick up Rowan's Scepter, Owl, Empty Throne, Toad, Quill, Fox, Crane, Falcon, and Tortoise. Tortoise and Falcon also have really strong abilities for the kit. Tortoise obviously giving you a very good shield, 100% chance once you hit 50% health to get that shield, and I just went ahead and stuck that on field command since it's always on. And then Falcon Swoop is a 15% chance on Primal Strike to activate, but it launches Falcons outward, and those Falcons deal weapon, physical, and bleeding damage with a chance to pass through enemies at 100%. So they're another AoE tool. They don't activate as often because it's Primal Strike. So I may be able to... You might want to experiment with that a little bit. Ultimately, though, this isn't a huge part of how I focus on the build, so I think it's fine where it's at. But you may be able to get it to activate more often with a different ability. Now, all that said, devotions out of the way, we do have to talk about the gear because endgame gear is important for this endgame build. We're going to keep it short and sweet, though, because there's only a couple pieces that really round this build out, and number one is Gut Smasher, the two-handed weapon. It's a mace that you're going to be using with big modifications to Savagery and Blade Arc, providing them both with extra weapon damage, giving them more flat bleeding damage, and buffing those things as well. This hammer also converts your lightning and chaos damage into physical damage as well. It's incredibly helpful because physical is one of our big damage types that often gets overlooked, but ultimately it helps you smash more. It also has a very, very good passive that comes along with it called Gutsplosion, and that is when an enemy dies, you have a 100% chance to blow them up, dealing physical damage and percent health damage to enemies in a small radius around the exploded enemy. It's got a half a second recharge on the skill, but I mean, that's not much to worry about because people just like chain react, explode, and die in big groups of bad guys. It's really fantastic. This is the whole reason that this build can hang in Ultimate, as far as I understand. We're also working on finishing up the Blood Ragers set, but right now all we've got is the coat and the cowl. Putting points into Feral Hunger and our Blade Arc, sorry. The helmet for this set is also going to be giving us another 100% chance on enemy death called Blood Frenzy. So, after you're able to kill an enemy, you've got 5 seconds of cooldown with 15 seconds of duration. So basically, any time that you kill an enemy, you get 10% of your health back, you get a buff to bleeding damage, and your health regen along with 10% attack speed. It's only a 5-second CD, it's 15 seconds of duration. there's a lot more uptime than there is downtime. That's what I was trying to say. I don't know why it was so hard to get out. Whew. Doombringer is our amulet, though. That's giving a bigger arc to Feral Hunger, giving more damage to Feral Hunger, which means more life vamp for Feral Hunger for us. We've also got on the Mythical Grasp of Unchained Might, which are, again, pretty easy to find as far as gloves go, but they increase Blade Arc's weapon damage by 20% and drop on some internal trauma damage. We've got Blood Fury coming off of the Blood Fury Spalders, which is, again, it's similar to the Blood Rager's Cowl, but basically when you get hit, 100% chance when you get hit, you have a 12-second duration of bleeding damage buff and attack and casting speed increase, which is nutty, because you can just whack people like a machine gun pretty quickly. I am running out of time, but there are... well, actually, there's no other real big items to worry about, other than the Rylot Crest, but that's a monster infrequent. And that's all I got. If you like this video, feel free to let me know. If you want more of this build, let me know as well. But this is all I've got for today, everybody. Peace out.